Howdy, Connection Group leaders. Happy Thursday. Hope you're doing well. I'm over here in Reclaimed. I know that there is a pretty predominant theology in our church that a good cup of coffee fixes most things. I don't hold to that theology. That's how I believe ice cream is supposed to work. Nonetheless, coffee may play a part in our video today. We're talking about Job this week. We're literally the whole book of Job. And I say the whole book of Job. We're just starting beginning, which truthfully, I know that feels like a lot, but truthfully, that's how most churches handle the book as a whole. Job can be a little bit of a beatdown. It's 42 chapters. The first 2 chapters lay the groundwork and the theology. The next 30 chapters, you're listening to a bunch of guys argue. And some of what's said is a lie, and some of it's truthful, and it's almost all depressing. And then God speaks. And when God speaks, that's really good. That's what we get to look at some today, both at the start and the finish. So don't bemoan the fact that we're only covering just this first chapter, really all in one day. We're covering the book of Job. And then that's pretty common, but also we want to get this point across. Now, here's some important things I think do need to be conveyed. Number one, the material does a beautiful job, both the student lesson and the adult lesson. The adult lesson in particular is really, really good, just approaching suffering and the theology of it. So I'm not going to talk a lot about that right now. But as I was reading this and thinking about it, there are some things that I think are worth saying, particularly in how we minister one another as people are suffering. And the truth is, and you know this, there are lots of people in our church that are suffering in various ways. Some in what might be considered really big ways, some in maybe more subtle ways. There are people silently suffering with things. They just haven't spoken up yet. But part of our job as believers is to minister to one another and aid one another in our suffering. So this is why this is so helpful. That being said, when we are ministering to people who are suffering, it's easy to go to Job. In fact, Job is helpful because it does offer perspective on our suffering, certainly to the extent of suffering, like, oh, you think your day's bad? Wow, did all of your children die in one day? It would be easy to go there, but let's not compare or even belittle people's suffering. I make this same sort of reasoning when I'm dealing with people's strength and how much somebody can handle, right? It's just because someone else thinks something is heavy doesn't mean I think it's heavy, and vice versa. Heavy is heavy to those particular people. Well, pain is pain. Just because it maybe doesn't seem like a big deal to me doesn't mean it's not a big deal to that person. So as we're ministering to people, man, let's be so gracious and generous with one another. Don't belittle or compare your suffering to somebody else's. Graciously listen and seek to encourage. That's really is. I can't emphasize that point enough. And really, that's where Job's friends went wrong, at least in one other area too. But don't try to compare suffering, even when it comes to Job's suffering. Right? Again, there's perspective there and it can be helpful, but maybe not in the midst of that serious amount of pain. Number 2, there's this really popular comedian's clip that's going around right now, has been for a year or so. His name's John Crist. It's a really funny clip where he talks about Job's wife. See, God and his sovereignty allowed these attacks from Satan. And so Satan just takes out all sorts of things in Job's wife. But the comedian's comment was, but he left Job's wife alone. How awful that lady must have been, right? And there's some humor in that, ha ha ha. Part of what comes up from that is the fact that in chapter 2, Job's wife actually looks at Job and says, man, just curse God and die. And you're like, golly, that's really harsh, Mrs. Job. But this is a good time to remember when people are in pain, they say crazy things. Right, wrong, or indifferent. They just, pain causes us to not think clearly. And so as we are ministering to people, it's good to remember sometimes they're going to say things that they don't mean. And you've probably been there before where you've said something you didn't mean, and then you have to come back and apologize. And again, as we're being gracious to one another, give people some space to say things that they may not mean. Or usually it's more of just asking questions, and that's okay. But realize pain's going to bring about just words that are painful and maybe not the best, right? I would also say, don't try to answer the question of why suffering is happening. Now, the truth is, sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes people are suffering because of their own poor choices. And generally speaking, those people know that. And so in the middle of the pain and the suffering, pointing that out in that exact moment, not the best of timing. But other times, like for instance, in Job's case, it's not really clear. It's clear to us because we have the background information. We see the setup to the prequel to the story, right? Job, as he's experiencing this, has no idea why he's experiencing this pain. And trying to answer the why question in the middle of that pain is usually not the best process. Certainly for us to assume the why on our part, that's not helpful. And so I would say in those moments, man, the best thing Job's friends did for him was just to sit with him. Literally, it says for a week. They just sat with him, seemingly just mourned with him. They were just there with him. That can be a really good thing. This is where the coffee thing comes in. Sometimes the best thing we do, man, take that person for some coffee, or in my case, some ice cream, or some Dr. Pepper, or take them a casserole. Man, we used to do that so well as Baptists. Still, lots of y'all are so good at that, right? We just make some food and be with people and bless them in that way. Just sit and listen. Don't try to answer why. But the most important thing is worship. And I don't just mean that in your sadness, you've got to break out into song. By the way, there's so much more to worship than just singing. We need to keep reminding ourselves this. Worship is just the acknowledgement of God's control over all things. And it's the remembrance of God's goodness and his worthiness. And we see that response in Job, man, but the Lord is given, the Lord is taken away. Blessed be the God. Blessed is God. I praise him and I bless him no matter what. That's what we need to be doing. That's what we need to be doing for one another, right? We're praising God for each other and leading others to worship, but acknowledging, and this really is helpful, that the sovereign King of the universe and the ages, he is in control of all things. And he is good, and he loves us, and he has a plan, and he's carrying out his purposes. We especially need to remember those things before the pain starts. We've got to solidify those things in our heart, but we can lovingly administer that truth to one another, and worship is one of the best ways to do that. So again, this isn't a if this happens, it's when it happens, or rather as it's happening right now in lots of our people's lives. And let's remember not only the theology behind the suffering, but just some good, I don't even want to say basic principles, but just some principles of ministry. And I'm sure there's lots more that you can teach me of how we can aid one another as we're carrying one another's burdens. Guys, I love y'all. Can't wait to see you on Sunday. See you later.